Today is March 17th, 2022. I am Gabriele Fellows with the Museums of Lake County, and this is an oral history interview with Ed Robey. Ed Robey, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
So to get started, what can you tell us about your name? Were you named after anyone?
I'm named after my father. I'm Ed Robey Jr.
Oh.
But I quit using the junior after my father passed away.
What is your date of birth and how old are you?
August 6, 1946. That makes me 75.
Where were you born?
I was born in Oakland, California. My parents lived there, and we had a little summer cabin here out in Oak Cove. It was built by my grandfather. And my mom would bring my brothers and I up for the summer, and my father would stay and work and come up on the weekends. But we moved up here full time when I was about 11.
Where did you live before?
Oakland.
Oakland?
Yeah.
What were your parents' names?
Well, my father's name was Ed Robey, and my mother's name was Evelyn Robey. Her maiden name was Milliken. She was of Irish descent, and my father was of Scottish descent.
Do you have any siblings?
Not anymore. I had two brothers, but they've both passed on.
What were their names?
Well, I'm the oldest. The middle one, his name was Lawrence, and the youngest one was named Dennis.
Where did your ancestors come from?
Well, I think I just said that, but Ireland and Scotland.
Do you know anything about how they migrated here?
Not a whole lot. I know a little bit that, my father did some research after he watched Roots, that TV show. He got interested in his ancestors, but it's hard to find information back then. Nowadays, there's a whole lot of it around.
Who would you say raised you and why?
Well, my mom, primarily, because my father was working all the time. But why? Because she's my mother. Yeah, and she was a good mom, too. I really liked both my parents. I was lucky. I had a good childhood. We weren't poor, we weren't rich. We were just middle class, white folks. Just kind of typical people.
What did your father do for a living?
Well, by the time I was born, he had done a lot of things when he was younger, but by the time I was born, he had become a real estate broker in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he sold houses.
Did he do that his whole life?
No. When he was young, he worked in the timber industry with loggers. He was what they called a whistle punk. He would drag these cables and chains around, and they'd hook them up to the trees that they'd cut down and drag them, stuff like that. Yeah. So he did a lot of stuff like that when he was young, but then he finally settled in on being a real estate broker. It was something that he liked doing.
Did he do that full time here in Lake County?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any stories about his job?
Well, yeah, I remember after we had moved up here, someone came and listed a resort with him, and he sold it. And he sold it we're talking the late 1950s, and he sold this resort for $250,000, and he got a 10% commission, which is $25,000, which was a lot of money back then. Well, anyway, word got around that this guy had come up and was able to sell resorts. So the people that owned Austin's resort came in and said, "Hey, we'd like you to sell our resort." Well, he took a look at it and fell in love with the place and took his $25,000 and made a down payment, and we bought Austin's resort.
Oh.
And so my first paying job, my dad paid me $1.50 a day to go down to Austin's beach and pick up all the trash and dead fish.
Oh, okay.
when I was about 12 years old. But so then, Austin's at the time was mostly just a campground. So what my dad started doing, he had a friend that knew how to move houses. And so he would buy little cabins, summer cabins that people had built. And he would have this guy move the cabins down to Austin's and set them up, and then my father would sell the lots. So he ended up putting in all these cabins down at Austin's Resort and building it up so it had cabins and a campground, and then he built the marina. I mean, that's what he did.
Is Austin's Resort still there?
Yes.
Okay.
It's right across from the park in Clear Lake, right across from City Hall.
Cool.
In fact, well, yeah, that was my main memory of what he did. I mean, we spent, once we had Austin's, both my mom and me and my brothers, we all worked, we worked at the resort. I picked up dead fish and trash. I pumped gas at the marina. On every Monday after the people had left that had filled the place up on the weekends, I had to take all the trash and the leavings of, them cleaning fish that they'd caught, all this.
Oh.
And I had to collect it all and take it to the dump. That was one of my jobs.
Was there a lot of people that stayed there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you, back in the late 50s, early 60s, this place was jumping. There was no crime. It was a place people came to have fun. I didn't even know that people locked their doors when I was a kid. But then, I guess the state of California built a highway that went up towards Tahoe, and a lot of the folks from the Sacramento Valley started going to Tahoe instead of coming here, so things kind of slowed down. But yeah, it was really nice back then. It was just a real fun place, especially for the people that lived here full time, because there were two seasons, summer and winter. Summer went from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and that's when all the tourists came up. The rest of the time, the few of us that lived here full time had this beautiful, beautiful place all to ourselves. It was really, really a great place for a kid to grow up in.
What did your mother do for a living?
Well, she was primarily a housewife, but she worked at the resort and, worked with my dad. She did bookkeeping, and I remember she'd go around, and we had these trees that put forth all this white, fuzzy stuff in the springtime. I think they were called cottonwood trees. Anyway, she would go around. She discovered that if you lit the white, fuzzy stuff on fire, it just burned up real fast. So she would go around and burn up all this stuff from the cottonwood trees. I mean, I have a distinct memory of that because it was really, for a kid, it was pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. What do you know about how your parents met?
Well, from what I remember them telling me, she was working at Woolworth's. I don't know what department. And my father went to Woolworth's one day to shop for something, and he took one look at her and fell instantly in love. That's the story he told me. It was love at first sight.
Were they married?
Oh yeah, sure.
What year did they get married?
Probably 1945. Yeah, they met in Oregon.
Oh.
Yeah, Salem.
Oh, okay. So they lived there for a while?
Yeah, and then they moved to California.
What are some of your earliest childhood memories?
Oh boy. I'll tell you, at my age right now, my memory is not as good as it used to be. So childhood memories from 75 years ago, I don't know. I remember walking to school when I was in grammar school. I went to grammar school until around 1957 or 58. That's when I moved here to Lake County. I remember the park. I remember my parents' backyard and the various trees and things that were back there. I remember my mother reading to me and my brothers. She liked to read to us. She read these books like the Bobbsey twins and, you know, things like that.
What was the Bobbsey twins about?
Well, it was a kid's book. It was about these twins that had their little adventures.
Oh. Did you have a best friend as a kid?
Yeah. Yeah, his name was Gary Davis.
Do you remember any stories about him?
No, we just used to, you know, hang out, walk around, you know, we'd walk. There was a place where you could get sodas. Back then they had soda shops, you know, we'd go to the library, you know, just do stuff. We never got in any trouble.
What was a soda shop?
Well, you go in there and you order a soda, and they would make it on the spot. You know, they'd put in carbonated water and whatever flavoring and other stuff.
Was that here in Clear Lake?
No,
Oh.
This is in Oakland. You asked me
okay.
about my childhood. I'm going back to, no, it was on East 14th Street in Oakland.
Oh, okay. Did you have a hobby as a child?
Oh, yeah, I imagined that I wanted to be a rocket scientist, and so I would make little model rocket ships out of the cardboard fillings that came back from the laundry, you know, in my dad's shirts. And I would draw, and so on and so forth, yeah.
Did you have any pets?
Oh yeah, I had a fox terrier named Teddy. Teddy was great. The only thing about Teddy, well, after we moved to Lake County, my parents, at first we lived in this older house, but after they got Austin's, my father built a house that was kind of up on the hill behind where City Hall is now, so that he could keep an eye on the resort. And when he built it, he only built, it was a 3-bedroom house, and I had gone off to college, so he didn't build a bedroom for me. So when I came home, if it was in the wintertime, I'd sleep on the couch in the living room, but in the summertime, I would sleep outside in the backyard on one of these little couch things that made into a bed. And that doggone Teddy, she would go down the hill and go down to the beach and roll in dead fish.
Oh no.
Some dogs like to get really stinky. And then she'd come back up and jump into bed with me out there in the backyard.
What was your favorite subject in school?
Well, science and math.
And where did you go to elementary school?
Well, in Oakland, I went to Daniel Webster School. But then when we moved up here, I went to Burns Valley School.
And where did you go to high school?
Lower Lake.
What was Lower Lake High back then?
Well, I graduated from Lower Lake in 1963, and there were, I think, 40 kids in my graduating class.
Oh.
It was a lot smaller than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun, you know. It's grown a whole lot. A lot of the buildings that are there now didn't exist back then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was small. But everybody knew everybody, and we all got along.
Did you have a favorite teacher in high school?
Oh, I had several. Yeah. One of them, a fellow named Bob James, Mr. James. Yeah, he taught history, and he also, I think he taught biology some. I also had a teacher named Mrs. Ripka, and she taught science classes as well as French. I took French from her.
Cool.
Don't ask me any French because I don't remember much of it anymore. But yeah, I got along well with the teachers. I was a good student. You know, I got pretty much straight A's and was, you know, that's how I got into Berkeley. I mean, I went straight from Robey High School to UC Berkeley.
Really?
Yeah.
So talk about Berkeley a little bit. What was that like?
Well, remember now, I graduated from Robey High School in 1963. So that means I went to Berkeley during the 60s.
Right.
And Berkeley during the 60s was a really interesting place. And I'll tell you, I went down there, I was just a kid from a little town up here in Lake County. And that's really where I kind of grew up, because there were students from all over the world there. I mean, literally all over the world. And I lived in the student co-ops. So, I don't know if you know much about co-ops, but at the co-ops, everybody had to work 10 hours a week. We didn't have there weren't any hired people. The co-ops were these the co-ops started in the 30s during the Depression, and they got these older buildings, you know, like an old hotel, things like that, and the students would run it. We would do the cooking, we would do the cleaning, we'd do the, you know, and so you'd start off kind of as a low-level worker, and then the longer you lived there, you'd kind of work your way up and you'd become a manager. Like I was the cleanup manager, and I had a crew of guys working, and I made sure they had all the materials they needed to mop the floors and wax the floors and all that stuff. But yeah, so anyway, I was there in Berkeley during the free speech movement, during the marches against the war in Vietnam, the sit-in, big sit-in at Sproul Hall, all that stuff.
What was the big sit-in?
Well, see, you're young, you don't even know about these things, but there was, at one point, there was a lot of students were protesting the war in Vietnam. And there was this guy who got up on the front steps of Sproul Hall, which was the administration building. And he gave this speech. And they brought in the campus police brought a police car in, and they were going to take him away. And all these students surrounded the police car. And then he climbed up on top of it and kept giving his speech. Well, then the students, they went into Sproul Hall and had a big sit-in. So then, this is back when Ronald Reagan was governor. And anyway, so they called in a whole bunch of police. They called in the Berkeley City Police, Oakland City Police, and they brought in a whole bunch of buses. And after the buses arrived, they took the students and dragged them out of the building and threw them in these buses and took them out to this old Japanese internment camp left over from World War II.
Wow.
Yeah, and kind of like they kept them there overnight, and then the next morning the faculty got a blanket bail bond and got them bailed out. But I went down there with a bunch of my friends from the co-op, and to help bail out our friends. There were a lot of people that went down there and sat there freezing all night long, waiting to bail out people that we knew that had gotten arrested. But it was a pretty big deal. I mean, it was in the national news and all that stuff.
So where were you during the Summer of Love?
Well, I was in Berkeley, and, you know, I'd go over to San Francisco and, you know, be in Golden Gate Park, and, you know, I mean, I was at the Fillmore before Bill Graham was running it. I was at the Human Bee Inn, if you ever heard of that.
What was that?
And there was...
What was the Human Being?
It was just a big gathering in Golden Gate Park with bands and music and people dancing.
Cool.
Yeah, thousands of people. It was fun.
Do you remember what bands played?
No. I do remember early on, I was at another event where I got to see Big Brother in the Holding Company with Janis Joplin. And what was the other one? There was several fairly big name bands back then. But there was a big music scene going on during the 60s in the Bay Area. There was music everywhere. And in fact, bands would come up here to Lake County and play. We had bands playing we used to have a skating rink, and the bands would play at the skating rink. Bands would play up at the old Siegler Springs Resort. They played, there was it still exists, there was a big building out in Clear Lake Park where they played too. And where the El Grande Hotel is now, there was this giant deck. It was like a huge platform that was built there that was called the Dance Pavilion. And they'd have bands playing there at night. There was no roof, it was just a big open air thing.
Cool.
But it was really fun. It was really fun.
Did you have a mentor growing up?
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. I had a teacher named Herb Wong. Mr. Wong was into jazz. He had a radio show on a little jazz station in Oakland called K-Jazz. But he mentored me, and he realized that I was really voracious reader. So what he would do, he set it up so that one of the periods of the day, instead of going to class, I got to go to the library and look at all the books and check out books and so forth. And he encouraged me to read a lot of different things. I mean, yeah, I'd say he was if I had a mentor, he'd be it.
So what was your major in college?
Well, when I first went to college, I was going to major in physics because I was really good in math and science. So when I was a freshman, I took an introductory physics class that was taught by a famous physicist named, what was his name? They used to call him the father of the H-bomb. Oh, Edward Teller, okay? But I didn't like him. I thought he was a jerk. I don't know, something about him just rubbed me the wrong way. And then when I was when I was a sophomore, my first roommate flunked out. All he wanted to do was party. And so I had a new roommate named Frank. And Frank was really a good student. And he got me into being a good student too, because Norm just about took me down with him. Anyway, Frank told me about a professor that he had named Becker, Ernest Becker. He said, Ed, you got to come to class with me and check this guy out. He's not like any other instructor I've ever seen here. So I started going to class with Frank, and I really, really liked Becker. Now, Becker was an unusual character. He had 3 PhDs. He had a PhD in psychology, one in anthropology, and one in sociology. And his whole thing was that you needed to have an integrated science about human beings. You couldn't just look at their childhood and the way they were raised like psychologists do. You couldn't do that and ignore their culture or their society. You had to look at it all as a whole package. And so I switched from physics and became what they call a social science field major. I majored in the whole field of social sciences. And that's what I have my degree in, signed by Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you have a girlfriend in college?
Yes.
Who was your girlfriend?
Well, her name was Susie Gilman.
How did you meet her?
Well, I was living in a co-op called Cloyne Court, which was an old hotel. I mean, it was built in the 1800s. But the co-op organization, the University Students Cooperative Association, decided they wanted to build a new building, the first new building they ever had. And they wanted to build it with a men's wing, a women's wing, and a central area with a big kind of a living room, TV room, recreation area on the first floor, and then above that a big dining room and kitchen. So I got in, that was the first time I ever did any fundraising. We all of us members of the co-op, we would go around to our professors and try to hit them up for donations. And we raised enough money that we were able to use it as matching funds for a grant from the Cowell Foundation, and we got enough money to build this brand new building. Well, so how did I meet Susie? Well, she was in the women's wing.
Oh, okay. Cool. What was your first job after college?
Oh, well. Good question. For a short period of time, not a long time, I ran a printing press in a print shop.
Oh. Was that in Berkeley?
No.
Where was it?
It was in Virginia City, Nevada.
Oh, so you moved to Nevada?
For a while.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And how long were you there for?
Oh, year and a half.
Okay. And then did you move back to California?
Well, okay. It's a little more complicated than that. While I was a student at Berkeley, I got interested in religion. Not just Christianity, but all religions, whether it was Eastern religions or Native American religions or whatever. And it all started with Becker, because that was one of the questions he gave us for our final. I mean, we all had to write an essay, is what is religion? Well, I mean, you could write volumes on that. So anyway, it got me curious. So I started checking out different religions, and I found a yoga school over in San Francisco, and I started studying yoga. Not just the physical exercises, but meditation and all that. And the yoga school had purchased a building in Virginia City, Nevada. It was just outside of town, kind of downhill on the eastern side of town. It was the old Nevada Brewery. Bought this old building, from the 1800s, and they set it up as an ashram, which is kind of a spiritual retreat where people go and learn to meditate and so forth, away from the normal stuff in the world. And so after I graduated, I went up and lived at that ashram, and I ran the printing press that they had in their shop.
Oh, okay.
So that's what that was all about.
So what other places have you lived besides Lake County?
Well, I've lived in Los Angeles, I've lived in Palm Springs, I've lived in San Francisco. That's about it.
When did you come back to Lake County?
Well, I don't know. I think probably around 1970, 71, something like that.
And what was your job?
See, I kept leaving. For a while I kept leaving, and then I never found any place I liked better, so I'd come back. And then I'd leave again. I was young, I wanted to see the world, go off and have an adventure and so forth. But finally I just came back and kind of settled down.
And what was your job when you got here?
Well, let's see. I first started working at the Imperial Cabinet Shop, building cabinets. See, I had helped work my way through college, and when we built this brand new co-ed co-op, which was called the Ridge Project because it was on Ridge Road, a a lot of us students worked through the summer building the furniture. We built all of our own beds and desks and stuff down in the underground parking lot under this building that was being built. So I had some experience doing that kind of work. So I got a job at the cabinet shop. Worked there for a while. Then I got a job with the county. I was, because I had my degree in social sciences, I became a social worker. And I worked as a social worker.
Was that for the County of Lake?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was that like?
Well, it was interesting. At first, I had all of the elderly people on welfare, as well as the disabled people on my caseload. That was my caseload. I had adults. And then after about a year, they switched me over to family and children's. I used to call it AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children. So I did that.
Did you go out in the field and talk to people, or was it all?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'd have to go. I had to go when I was doing the elderly people, elderly and disabled, I would go to the nursing homes and talk to these folks, and I'd help them fill out the forms. A lot of them had a hard time filling out forms and so forth. And then when they switched me over to AFDC, I would go out and I would do what we called a site visit. But basically my purpose of making a site visit was to look for signs of neglect, child abuse, malnutrition, or poor living conditions, just to make sure everything was safe and sound.
What was your favorite thing about that job?
Well, my favorite thing really was talking with these older people, because they had great stories, just really great stories. I remember this one guy, he kept talking to me about how he was really lucky during World War II because he didn't have to go, he had a job. He was what they called a sprinkler fitter. And he put the sprinklers in the ceilings of commercial buildings and places where they were building planes and bombs and, Anyway, a sprinkler fitter was one of these specialized jobs where they didn't draft you and send you out and, to get shot at. Anyway, he kept telling me all these stories about how there were very few men around and he had a wild romantic life because there were so many single women and there weren't that many men. Anyway, he was a real character. I really enjoyed talking with him.
Do you have any children?
I do.
What are their names?
Daniel. I have one son.
Oh, and how old is he?
He's 41.
And what does he do?
He is sort of a freelance handyman.
Oh, okay.
He's got a lot of tools, and he'll go out and help remodel a house or, do stuff like that. He knows how to do carpentry and plumbing and electrical work.
And where does he live?
Up in the state of Washington, in a little town outside of Seattle.
Do you see him often?
No, I mean, I used to, but not lately, just because he's so far away.
So let's talk about how you got into political office. How did you get onto the city council?
Okay. Well, I was working at the time. See, after I left the county, I got my contractor's license and became a general contractor, and I was building houses. And I went into the Napa Auto Parts store to buy an oil filter. And the fellow that owned it at the time, Dwayne Garner, he says to me, "Hey, Ed, you hear there's a group of people that want to incorporate this town into a city. And I said, yeah, I know. This is the third try. And he said, I have a feeling it's going to pass this time. And I was looking at all the people that were running, and I don't know any of them. I sure wish I think it's going to pass, and I sure wish I knew somebody that was going to be on the city council. And I said, well, why don't you run? He goes, I'm too busy with my store. And he goes, why don't you run? And I said, well, I'm pretty busy too, you know. Well, so comes the weekend, and I went over to visit one of my high school buddies who was living in the Bay Area working for an airline, but he had inherited his parents' place here in Lake County, and he'd come up on the weekend. So we were sitting out on his porch having a beer, talking about things, and I mentioned that the city was having an incorporation, and he asked me to run. So after two people, I got thinking about it. And I had, you know, some political, I mean, I had been politically active to a degree in Berkeley, and I had gotten involved in a thing called the Lake County Energy Council. You see, back then there was a lot of geothermal development going on, and Phillips Petroleum wanted to drill a steam well out at Borax Lake. And I realized that Borax Lake, you know, it's kind of like a box canyon. And the steam wells, they emit a lot of hydrogen sulfide and other toxic type fumes. And hydrogen sulfide gas is heavier than air, so it settles on the ground. And I was thinking, geez, you know, the only way that it could go would be right into town, you know, right into Clear Lake Park, out there in the area we used to call the Gobi Desert. So I got involved with the Lake County Energy Council to try to make sure they put some reasonable regulations on these steam wells. So anyway, I'm just saying I had been active, but I'd never run for office, and I didn't know how or anything like that. But that's really what got me started. I went in and I filed my papers, and I had two signs made. And I put one sign again across the street from each of the post offices, the one in Clear Lake Park and the one in Clear Lake Highlands. And that was it. That was my campaign. I ran, there were about 20 people that ran, and I came in number 6. There were 5 seats. So I didn't win.
Oh.
But the guy that got the most votes was this attorney. And I think people voted for him because they saw attorney, you know, on the voting thing where you have to list your occupation. So the problem with him was that he had left town owing a bunch of money to a bunch of local businesses.
Uh-oh.
And so when they went looking for him to tell him that he'd won, he got the most votes. Nobody could find him. He was gone. So number 6 moved up to number 5. And that's how I got elected. I was on the first city council in the city of Clear Lake.
Wow.
In 1980.
Okay.
And we got elected in November, and we had 6 months basically till the beginning of July to put together a city from scratch. And that was a really educational experience. It was very, very interesting.
What types of things did you have to do to build the city from scratch? What did it take?
Well, a city provides services. Okay? What kind of services? Well, police, I mean, law enforcement is a service that a city provides. Roads, fixing potholes and fixing the streets and the drainage, that's another thing. So we had to figure out how to do all that. I'll tell you a story. We had to make a decision of whether to try to contract the law enforcement services with the sheriff's department or to create our own police department. And so what we did was we invited the sheriff to come down to the city council meeting and give us a proposal. What could he do and what would it cost? And so he came down and basically gave us a proposal that he would provide the same level of law enforcement that we had before we incorporated for $1 million a year. And we thought to ourselves, well, wait a minute. The reason that the voters voted to incorporate because they wanted better law enforcement and they wanted better streets. So we told them, you know, thank you, but we'll start our own police department. So we had to interview a bunch of people, you know, and hire a police chief, and you know, he set up the police department. Then we didn't have time to set up our own public works department because a public works department requires a lot of equipment and so on and so forth. So we hired a firm and contracted out public works. We did that for a few years and then finally created our own. But you know, it was stuff like that to get set up. You know, we had to get a building. We had to get a building to be City Hall. I mean, where are you going to go to buy a building permit? By the way, I bought the very first building permit. I got permit number 1. I built a house for my brother, Dennis. Yeah.
Cool. Do you remember the names of the other city council members at the time?
Sure.
What were their names?
Well, you know Tom Hewlett, the dentist?
Yes.
Dr. Hewlett? Tom Hewlett was our first mayor.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, we've been friends ever since. I mean, he was my dentist. Okay. There was a fellow named Jack Lusich. Jack Lusich was a fireman. There was Doris Logatetta. Doris Logatetta and her husband Lou had, they owned a little resort, but they also had, I don't know what you'd call it, but he was the milkman. He did, they distributed dairy products. And there was a guy named Gene Octor. Gene Octor and his wife, he was a retired policeman, but he and his wife had bought a resort. One of those resorts down by Mendo, where Mendo Mill is now, the kind that has one long road going down the lake and a whole bunch of mobile homes on both sides. So let's see, there was me, Tom, Doris, Jack, and Gene. That's the 5 council members.
Cool. So how long were you on the city council for?
Well, I served 3 terms. See, at the very beginning, we divided it up. Some people got 4-year terms and some people got 2-year terms. So that, because, you know, the election cycle, you don't want to elect the whole council at once. You elect part of them one time and part of them the next time. It's for continuity. So, because I was the low man on the totem pole, I mean, I'd gotten the least votes of all. I was one of the people that got a 2-year term. So I had to run again after 2 years. And then after that, there was a local movement of people who they didn't want to be in the city. They didn't like the city. They were mad that the city had incorporated. And they started a disincorporation movement. They wanted to disincorporate the city. And that was my first experience with LAFCO, because of course, incorporations and disincorporations and things like that, they all have to go through LAFCO. So, the disincorporation movement flopped. It's pretty much the same process to disincorporate as it is to incorporate. And you have to do financial studies and demonstrate that what you're trying to do makes sense. And the incorporation made a lot more sense in terms of giving the people local government services for their tax money and local control, a local say over what the priorities were and so forth. So anyway, I served on the city council until 1988. And I had bought some land outside of the city limits, up on the hills outside of Lower Lake, up near Perini Hill, and I built a house. And so when I got my house done, and my wife and I moved out there, then I couldn't be on the city council anymore.
Oh.
Because you have to live within the jurisdiction.
Oh, okay.
So I was out there, and by then, see, I discovered kind of by accident that I had a real talent for computer programming. I had purchased a little computer and in 1979, and I had taught myself how to program it, and I had written a payroll program for my construction business. You know, printed out paychecks, printed out the quarterly reports and the W-2s and all that stuff. Well, anyway, so there was a period of time where the interest rates went sky high and construction slowed down to nothing. And I was spending all my time trying to just find jobs to keep my guys working. And finally, it just got to the point where I started doing computer work. I started doing payroll for the Clear Lake Observer, which was the local newspaper at the time, for example. And then my son came along, and he needed the spare bedroom, which is what I was using as my computer office. So I rented a storefront in the middle of town and opened the first computer store in Lake County.
Oh.
And I would sit there and I would work on my programming projects, and if somebody wanted to buy a computer, then they'd come in and talk to me, and I'd try to see what they needed and see what I could do for them.
Was that in Clear Lake?
Yeah.
On Lakeshore?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, right at the top of the hill. Right, is it still a laundromat there?
Oh, where?
Well, you know, and you drive on Lakeshore Drive, and there's one point where there's kind of a hill, and it goes up and then drops back down.
Oh, where the Sunflower Chinese restaurant was?
Yeah, near there.
Okay. I don't think it's there anymore. The
Well,
laundromat.
no. Okay. Well, anyway, that's really,
Were you on the city council at the same time?
uh-huh.
As
Well-
when you owned the...
Well, not after I built my house, and I had,
Okay.
I mean, for a period of time, I was there until I built my house, so, yeah.
Well, talk about how you got recalled from the city council.
Oh, well, the people that wanted to disincorporate the city, you know, their movement flopped, but they really didn't like this city. They said, we moved up here to get out of the city. We don't want to be in a city. So anyway, some of them, after they failed at disincorporation, they decided, well, if we can't disincorporate, we'll run for the council and try to take over the council themselves. And but then they decided, well, let's recall the city council, and then we'll have a special election, and we'll run for it. So they circulated petitions, and they said that the city council was spending too much money, and they weren't listening to the people, that they were arrogant. That was it. That was the word. Anyway, so they had a big town hall meeting. I'll never forget this as long as I live. It was at the Lodge, which isn't there anymore. But they were talking about all the things that the city council was doing that they didn't like, and on and on. And then they decided to take public comments from the audience. Well, I jumped up and I said, look, oh, by the way, on the recall, they were going to recall the three other men, but not me and not Doris Lugateta. I jumped up and I said, look, this is a huge mistake. This recall is going to be divisive, it's going to be expensive, it's going to set the city back 10 years in terms of what we can get done around here, fixing up the streets and so forth. I said, look, you know, if you don't like the city council, run for this, or find somebody that you like support them to run, you know, but don't do this. This is a huge mistake. I work with these people. I don't agree with everything that gets done all the time either, but, you know, they're good people. They're honest. They're doing what they think is best. And they haven't done anything that deserves being recalled. If you want to recall them, recall me too. Well, that was a mistake. Because what they did was they added me onto the list. They left off the arrogant part.
Yeah.
They didn't accuse me of being arrogant. But the rest of the stuff was the same. Anyway, so there was an election. And what these folks did, they were clever. They published a little, it was like a little newspaper. It wasn't just a flyer. And they went around on election morning and dropped it on everybody's doorstep. You know, they printed up 1,000 of these things. And they accused us of being fiscally irresponsible and a bunch of stuff. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, I didn't take the recall seriously. I was too busy trying to help get this city going. And so were the other people. But they won. They recalled the four, me and the other three guys, and Doris was the only one left of the original council. So anyway, I went back to work at my computer store, and they had their special election, and they elected some people to fill the unfinished terms. I mean, it was only like a year that was left over from these people's terms in office. Well, so I just figured, okay, I'm just going to keep on writing computer programs. At the time I was developing a little utility billing system. And then I got a big job working for an airline in Las Vegas, writing a maintenance tracking system for a fleet of Boeing 737s. But I'm sitting there in my little computer shop, and people started phoning me and saying the strangest things. They would say things like, "You ought to run again. These people that got elected to take you guys' place are doing a worse job than the first batch," you know, stuff like that. And finally, this really nice elderly lady who had known me, she was a friend of my mother's and had known me since I was a little kid, she calls me up and she goes, "Eddie, you need to get back on that city council." And I told her, I said, "Oh, come on, you know, I got recalled." She goes, "No, you need to do it." Anyway, there are some people in this world you just can't say no to, and she's one of them. Jane Weaver was another. But, so I said, okay, fine, I'll put my name in the hat and run again. People know me. If they want me on there, fine. If they don't want me on there, fine. I'm not going to campaign. I'll just put my name on the list and see what happens. And I'll be doggone if I didn't get reelected.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was off the council for about a year, but anyway, so I moved out to my place out by Perini Hill, and the county supervisor in District 1 at the time was a woman named Voris Brumfield. And Voris asked me to be her planning commissioner.
Oh.
So I became a county planning commissioner and served on the planning commission for 8 years.
What year did you get on there? What year was that?
Well, it must have been around 1989.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly, but I was on the city council till 88. And then I moved out of town, so it must have been around 89, 90, somewhere in there. So, yeah, so anyway, I became a planning commissioner, and Voris, She didn't run again. So, but another really nice lady named Helen Whitney ran and won. And Helen asked me to stay on and be her planning commissioner. So I served under two supervisors, and I was on the commission for 8 years. And then Helen was going to run again. And I was supporting her. I was down in front of the post office in Lower Lake getting signatures on her petition. Because when you run for office, you have to get so many signatures. I think back then it was like 40 signatures minimum to run. And Helen called me up. She goes, Ed, she goes, I don't know exactly how to tell you this, but something's come up in my life. And I found out later on it was her mother. Her mother had become very ill, and Helen had to take care of her mom. But she didn't tell me at the time. She just said, something's come up in my personal life, and I decided I'm not going to be able to be a county supervisor. So I'm not going to run. And if you'd like to run for supervisor, you need to go to Lakeport and take out your papers right now, because there's only 10 days left before the filing deadline.
Wow.
Yeah. So I drove up to Lakeport, took out the papers, and started collecting signatures for myself, and ran and won. And then I served on the Board of Supervisors for 12 years.
Wow. So what was your greatest accomplishment when you were on the Board of Soups?
Well,
or what are some of them?
It depends on how you look at it. You know, there's some accomplishments that were really personal favorites of mine, like getting the bathrooms built here at the Lower Lake Schoolhouse Museum. This place originally, it only had one bathroom, and it had been, this old building had been remodeled and fixed up and a stage built, and they were having events upstairs. But, you know, they'd get 100 people in here, and there's only one bathroom. You take a break, and it was terrible. So I found some funding, and we built a set of bathrooms here on the second floor where we are now, and it worked out really well. And the reason it was a personal accomplishment for me is, I mentioned Jane Weaver before. Jane Weaver was a force of nature, and she got things done, and you couldn't tell her no. Well, she was in a hurry to get some bathrooms built here, and she wanted to have portable bathrooms out in the parking lot, and I couldn't go for that. I said, Jane, you know, you don't want people having to go out down to the ground level, go out into the parking lot in the wintertime, and it's dark and cold and rainy. I said, it's not going to work. We need to build some bathrooms up here. Anyway, we went round and round, and finally I said, look, I'm not going to go for the bathrooms out there. Anyway, we sort of butted heads on that because she didn't want to wait. But I got it done as quick as we could, and after it was done, she told me I was right. She said, I'm really glad we did it this way. It's way, way better than what I had originally thought. And that personally was one of my favorite things. It wasn't a big deal. I mean, if you talk about big deals, I mean, there's lots of things that I did. Now, one of my favorite big deals was when I was on the city council. But if you really want me to just stick to when I was on the Board of Supervisors?
No, both. Both is fine.
Both? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Every county in California has a transportation planning board of some sort. And here in Lake County, we call it the APC, the Area Planning Council. But it really has to do with working with the state, with Caltrans, and helping them determine what the priorities for road construction are. Okay? So the APC tells Caltrans, this is our top priority project, this is second, this is third. And then Caltrans goes about trying to get the money from the legislature and get the project set up. Well, I was a new kid on the block on the APC. The APC is made up of the county and the cities. Well, the public works director at the county wanted to make the #1 project, making a tunnel under the Hopland grade, going from Lakeport over to Hopland. His idea was it would make it really convenient for travelers on Highway 101 to get into Lake County. It would help the economy of Lakeport primarily, but make an easy route into the county. And he had the city of Lakeport people backing him on that. And I argued, that the traffic studies all showed that the most traffic, the biggest need, was between Lower Lake and Clear Lake. That stretch of road was, the old highway was just a little narrow 2-lane road, and there was lots and lots of traffic. So we were going around and around, and I didn't have the votes. But there was this guy, one of the city councilmen in Lakeport, wonderful gentleman named Alden Jones. I liked Alden. Anyway, he took me, we took a break, and he took me over into the corner, and he goes, Ed, he goes, listen, I'm a horse trader, and I've got an idea. He says, if you'll support this tunnel project and get the city votes to help us make this tunnel project, number one, I'll get the city and the county to vote for your Highway 53 project to be in the number 2 priority. And I thought to myself, okay, I said, give me a minute to think this over. And I thought about it. And it occurred to me that number one, making a tunnel under a mountain range is going to be super expensive. And number two, the county line is on the ridge line of that, range of mountains between here and 101. And that the people in Mendocino County would never support putting a tunnel in through on their side. They're not going to help pay for a tunnel to divert tourists into Lake County. So I realized that this project, even though they wanted it, that it would never happen. It just wasn't a viable project. So I said, okay, we can do that, because I realized that it would be scratched off the list and my project would become number 1. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why we have the Highway 53 project that we do now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that was my very first political deal, you might say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's one thing I would, but in terms of the county, there's a whole bunch of things, but my favorite one, if I had to pick a favorite one, we have all these steam wells up on the mountains. We actually have one of the largest geothermal electrical generating systems in the world up there. We generate a lot of electricity. So it came to be that PG&E had decided it wasn't going to go into the electrical generating business anymore. They were going to go into the delivery of electricity, which they already did, but they owned power plants. Some of them were hydroelectric plants, but some of them were these geothermal plants. So they were going to divest themselves of all these. And the way the money worked was using a bunch of laws that were originally developed for the oil industry, where they got royalties, and there was royalties and subsidies and all kinds of things involved. It was complicated, but it was all regulated by the federal government, by this agency called the Mineral Management Service, MMS. It was a division of the Department of the Interior. Well, the MMS, they said, okay, well, the way things are, PG&E generates the power and then they sell it. I mean, at that time, there was, I'm getting way off into the weeds here. It was complicated, but basically what was going to happen was that the County of Lake got royalties because these were generated on federal lands within the county. And we were getting about $700,000 a year, if I recall. I mean, I might be a little off on that. But that our royalties, because of this change, was going to drop down to about $7,000 a year. We were basically going to lose all the royalties because of the way the rules worked with the MMS. So I got the bug that I was going to try to get the rules changed. And I went to the county administrator, Kelly Cox, and I told him, I said, hey, Kelly, I want to fight to get our royalties back. But I want your support on this, but here's the deal. If I get the royalties back, I want those royalties, maybe not all of them, but I want a bunch of them to be allocated towards building a new library and senior center down in Middletown. And Kelly said, I don't know if you're going to be able to get the rules changed, but have at it, and I'll back you on this library project if you can do it. So I started reading up on all this MMS regulations and stuff, and I got a flight back to Washington, D.C., and I went back there and I lobbied.
Oh.
Yeah. And I talked with our Congressman, Mike Thompson, and he was extremely helpful. I can't say enough good things about Mike Thompson. Mm-hmm. Mike, normally, my experience up to then, normally if you contact a state or federal representative about something or other, they'll write a letter. And that's about it. But what Mike Thompson did, he wrote a letter to the MMS and he hand carried it around the floor of the House of Representatives and got every California representative to sign on to this letter. Then he went over to the Senate and got our 2 senators to sign on to it. And then he sent it to the MMS. Well, let me tell you, that was wonderful because it really got their attention. I had gone back there in the early spring, and within a few months, they had started, they had scheduled public hearings on rate change, on changing the rules for the rates that they charged and how the royalties worked. And the geothermal industry freaked out. They didn't know what was going on. They'd never seen anything like this before. Anyway, to make a long story short, I got our royalties back. And it provided enough funding. We now have a beautiful library and senior center in Middletown, and that's all paid for. And we're still getting those royalties today.
Oh, wow. Neat. Who would you say was your buddy when you were on the Board of Soups?
Oh, I got along with just about everybody. I didn't have a special buddy. I mean, I really enjoyed working with Carl Larson, who's passed away.
Oh.
But I really liked Karen Mackey, and Karen Mackey, I got to tell you this, Karen was cool. Karen was really a good county supervisor. And most people knew it. She was able to get lots of things done. And she represented the Lakeport area. Well, when I decided to run, Karen Mackey called me up at home one evening and she said, Ed, I know a lot of people down in your area don't like me. They think that I'm getting all the money spent up here in the Lakeport area and the South counties, getting the short end of the stick. So I know I'm not well liked down there. And I just want to tell you that if it would do you any good in your campaign, if you want to say bad things about me, it's okay with me. Go ahead and do it. Well, I didn't.
Oh.
I told her, I said, Karen, you're the most effective supervisor up there. If I was going to say anything about you, I'd say I'd want to be like you or be better than you. But anyway, I really liked Karen. She was good. And we got things done.
So are you on LAFCO currently?
Yes.
And what is LAFCO? What do you do?
LAFCO is the Local Agency Formation Commission. It's a little agency, every county has one. It's a little agency that most people never heard of. They have no clue as to what they do, and they probably will never have any kind of interaction with them. LAFCO handles incorporations, disincorporations, boundary changes, annexations, and such as that. So if you had say a fire district and there was an area that wasn't within, there was an area, I mean, this is a real thing that happened. It wasn't in the Lower Lakes Fire District, it wasn't in the Middletown Fire District, it was kind of out in the boonies in between, but they needed fire protection. And so Middletown wanted to extend their boundaries out there to take care of that area. Well, it has to go through LAFCO. When the city of Clear Lake incorporated, it had to go through LAFCO.
Okay.
Right now, Lakeport wants to annex South Main Street. Annex means bring it in to the city of Lakeport and move the city line down there to take in that area.
Okay.
And that's what LAFCO's working on today. I mean, actually, we had a meeting yesterday to deal with this. And it's getting close to being done.
Neat. Are you still a member of the Sierra Club?
Yes.
Are you on their board?
Yes.
What do you do?
We call it an executive committee.
Okay.
What do we do? Well, the Sierra Club does a number of different things. We're kind of a watchdog organization on projects. We also have people that do hikes. They set up interesting hikes in interesting places, and anybody can sign up and go on these hikes. We advocate for or against legislation if we think it's going to be good for the environment and good for the area. So, when there's a big project that comes along, we'll get a copy of the EIR and read it and make comments on it, and so on and so forth. The Sierra Club in Lake County is really pretty down to earth, and we've done some good things. Yeah, and they're really nice people too.
And are you still affiliated with the public access station?
Well, yes, to a degree. I used to be on the public access station board for a number of years, and but not anymore. I'm slowly retiring from all of that just because I'm getting older and I want to do some travel and not have to be at meetings. People like me who've done it for a long, long time need to wake up and realize that we've got to step aside and let younger people in and take on these responsibilities. It's important. Just, we can't keep holding on to these things all the time.
Are you on any other boards or committees?
Not right now.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
So you're kind of trying to divest yourself from them and...
Yeah, LAFCO, I was on the PEG board of directors. That's the public access station. Up in PEG stands, for the benefit of the recording, stands for Public Education and Government. Those are the three things that the PEG station focuses on. And I was on it up until earlier this year. I've only been off it for a few months. Supervisor Sabatier took my place.
Oh.
And so LAFCO is the only thing I'm on right now, and the Sierra Club Executive Committee.
Where would you like to travel to?
Well, I would like to see New Zealand. Don't know why, but there's something about New Zealand and possibly Australia that have appealed to me.
Oh.
I did take a trip, my wife and I and another couple took a trip to Ireland and Scotland.
Oh, neat.
A couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed that. I felt so much at home in Ireland, I can't even describe it. It was very, very, I didn't expect to feel at ease, in a foreign country. But I'd like to go to France. I'd like to see Paris and maybe, some of the other European countries. I don't know. I want to have some time to just check out what other people around the planet are doing before I'm too old to travel.
What do you think are some of the biggest problems that face our nation, and how do you think they could be solved?
Well, That's a really good question. We have, I mean, everybody talks about how we're divided. We have all these political divisions. People treat politics kind of like football, you know. It's like you have your team and you root for your team and you root against the other team and all that stuff. And to me, that's just plain stupid. We need to realize that the way you get things done is to work together for the, you know, for the greater good. And you can have disagreements and you can try to work out compromises, but we need to quit this stupid, divisive politics that we have. I really think that that's dragging us down big time. And, you know, a lot of the folks behind it, they're taking advantage of the voters. They're making fools out of them because they, you know, they don't really help people understand how things really work. They make it about stupid stuff, like arguing about whether wearing a mask when you're having a pandemic is a violation of your freedoms. I mean, for Pete's sake, what is your freedom? Your freedom to inhale germs? I mean, we just have a lot of, I don't know what other word to use for it. It's just stupid stuff going on, and people are buying it. Not everybody, but so I think, and you ask how do you fix it? I don't really know other than education. We need to teach people how to be critical thinkers and be able to see through the baloney and figure out what's really going on. Mm-hmm. And how things work. You know, it is amazing. And I'll tell you something else. The farther you go up the ladder in government, the crazier and stupider it is. Local government, like the city and the county, you're dealing with your friends and neighbors. You go to the store, you go to the post office, and people know you and they talk to you and they tell you about things, you know, issues. That's where the rubber meets the road. But you get to the state level, and those folks, I mean, a lot of them are really good people. I'm not saying they're all bad, but they get a little more detached from the down-to-earth local stuff. Good state representatives have local representatives that keep them informed. Mm. But then you get up to the federal level, and the federal people, you know, they spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., and I don't know whether you've ever been to Washington, D.C., but that's a world unto itself. And yeah, anyway, it's strange.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh boy. Don't take it personal. When you're in public office, you get criticized by people that don't even have a clue as to what they're talking about. But it's, you know, people like to criticize their elected officials. You know, it's almost like you got a target on your, so you don't want to take the criticism personally. You want to listen and say, okay, I hear where you're coming from, but they don't really know you. They don't really, they're just, you know, mad or upset or whatever, and they'll blame you for it. I mean, who are you going to blame? I mean, I went to a gas station the other day and I saw a little thing, somebody stuck a sticker on a gas pump blaming Biden for the rise in oil prices. He didn't have anything to do with the rise in oil prices. I mean, they went up, now they're coming back down. I mean, those oil prices are set by a bunch of oil producing countries, you know, the Saudis and all these other, I mean, but it just shows people are ignorant and they don't understand. And that's why I think education, do you know, when I went to high school, they actually had a class called civics. Do they have civics anymore?
I'm not sure.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
They don't even know how government works. And they talk about the government. They don't understand that there's local government, cities and counties, there's state government, and then there's the federal government. And they all have different responsibilities and different processes and different things that they do, but it's not all one thing. But a lot of people don't understand that. They just talk about the government. You know, they would come in to the county or the city and want you to take care of a problem that only the federal government could fix. You know, we had a guy come to the Board of Supervisors and want us to stop the war in Iraq. And we said, we don't have any jurisdiction over the war in Iraq. And he got mad at us and told us off.
What would you describe as the best day of your life?
Oh boy, when my son was born.
And what advice could you give future generations?
Get involved in your community. Seriously, community service is an extremely rewarding thing. Not so much financially, but just personally, when you get the chance to actually accomplish something that makes your community a little better, it's a good feeling.
What have I not asked you that you think is important for other people to know?
Well, about me or about...
Yes.
Oh. Well, I'm just a local kid that got interested in people and how people work, how we get things done. You know, the human race is a really interesting species. We create magnificent works of art, music, poetry, buildings, you know, all kinds of things, literature. And at the same time, we're one of the nastiest, meanest critters on the planet. We kill each other. We have wars, you know, where we're merciless. Look at what's going on with Putin in Ukraine right now. Guy has no respect for human life whatsoever. So anyway, I just got fascinated by our species because I am one, you know, and I wanted to understand what motivates people and how people relate to each other and how we can get along together. It's, you know, whether conflict is really the only solution, you know, and I tend to go more with Gandhi, you know, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That's a Gandhi quote.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I've got a favorite quote from Winston Churchill. I've thought of this quote many, many times. And it goes like this. Churchill said, "I prefer politics to war because you can get killed more than once."
Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us today and for sharing your stories.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been interesting.